All right, looks like we're recording here and ready to get started. We're right at our start. So I'll kick it off and say welcome everyone to our June workshop, Problem Solving, the Foolproof Process. This is exciting because today I'm sharing my approach to solving strategic problems. And just like in all of our workshops, my goal here is to make this easy and consumable for you. So we're going to run through this information in just 25 minutes. And I'll leave you with the recording and all the resources to go through it on your own. And I'll say now that there are some really great nuggets here in the back half. So pay attention, or if you're watching this recording, get ready to hit pause. I'm going to share some of the things that they don't tell you or things you don't learn in school in the back half. But before we dive deep, I want to tell you my story about how I became a professional problem solver. So really, I approach problem solving the same way a scientist would approach an experiment. And I think the reason I do this is because before I was a strategist, I majored in evolutionary biology in college. And there I learned a lot about the scientific method. So if you're less familiar with the scientific method than me, let me give you a refresher. In the scientific method, you gather all the information that you can on the topic first. Then you clearly define a very specific question to study. Then with that question in mind, you develop a hypothesis or proposed answer to that question, and then you conduct analyses or experiments to test it. From those experiments, you derive conclusions, and then you derive insights from those conclusions. Now, if you're a strategic problem solver for a business and not a scientist, you're going to add a step, and you're going to come up with recommendations from your insights. So I realized through this and through my training as a consultant earlier in my career that solving business problems is really no different than solving scientific problems. And so the problem solving process I'm going to walk you through is quite similar. It has a few key differences. But before we dive in, why should you listen to me? Well, because I've been there. I've been an independent consultant for over 10 years and a strategy consultant for over 20. And in the last 5, I've grown Keenan Reid Strategies by helping my Fortune 500 clients solve their most complex strategic challenges. Now, my job every day is to help people solve problems, and I use this process to do it. And I'll add here that while this may seem kind of like a long process with many steps, actually it can be applied to any size strategic problem, big or small. The process itself is generally the same, but can be condensed with the amount of information that's available or needed. And it has never failed me. So let's move on. I think we've got an issue with the slides here. We've got lots to cover in the next 20 minutes, so I'm going to move fast. So with this in mind, you're going to walk away understanding today, 1, what is a strategic problem? 2, why you should use a repeatable process to solve a problem, and how that ultimately you do that because it saves you time and it improves the quality of your recommendations. And 3, how critical it is to engage the right people throughout the process and get their agreement on decisions. All right. So as we walk through the next bit of content, I want you to keep a couple themes in mind that you're going to see persistent across this process. First, it is having a repeatable process is your tool to turn chaos into order, right? It may feel like extra work to go through each step, but each step serves a purpose, and that purpose is to create order and smoothness into the process. Second, it helps to have a really tight filter on the information and conversations you bring in. So you're going to spend a lot of time upfront getting all the information you need, but from that, you're going to define a very distinct problem. And then you're going to make sure you have all the information that you need to solve that specific problem, but only the information that you need to solve that specific problem. All right. This is called being MICE, which is mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. I have my friend and colleague Troy once told me that MICE is like having all of your teeth. You want to have every single tooth, not too many, not any more than you're supposed to have, and you want them all in a nice order. And that, my friends, is MICE. Next, I want you to keep in mind that the process itself is going to guide you through a series of deconstructions and reconstructions, okay? You're going to take complex items and break them into bits, and then you're going to assess them, and then you're going to reconstruct them back into bytes to tell stories. And then from those stories, you're going to deconstruct them again into bits to break them into implementation plans. Okay. So deconstruct, reconstruct. And finally, this is the most important. The people matter. The people matter more than the process. The people matter more than the problem. And as a person who solves strategic problems, I run towards a problem, right? You have to remember that the people come first. Now, with that, let's get started. So in a nutshell, a strategic problem is an unresolved question or a critical challenge that impacts an organization's success. It may impact your financial incomes or your business results or the customer experience. And in fact, many strategic problems are big enough that they affect the strategic direction of the company itself. And in doing so, they also have an impact internally on the culture of the company, the mission, and the values of the company itself. So the stakes can be high. And with such high stakes, you need to take a thoughtful and objective approach to addressing these problems. They're best addressed in a logical and rational manner, not just shoot from the hip. And now I've said it several times, but I want to make sure this is perfectly clear. Investing the time in using a repeatable process matters. And why? Because it forces focus, it forces consideration, it forces assessment, and it ensures that you are involving the people who need to be engaged to make decisions and ultimately make solutions become a reality. But those of us who encounter strategic problems, and especially people whose job isn't to solve these problems every day, solving a problem can feel very, very difficult. And why? I think what happens is people start thinking through the contributors, the complexities, the variations, opinions, options, and then they get overwhelmed. And when they're overwhelmed, they freeze. So let's break apart why this happens. First is complexity. Strategic problems have many factors at play, which are interconnected and change over time. This makes it difficult to see the true problem and easy to be overwhelmed with the amount of inputs, insights, and opinions from different people. Next up is poor definition. Your perspective on a problem is always going to be different than someone else's. And the problem always looks different from different angles. And this perspective bias makes it very hard for teams to put their finger on a single problem to be solved, right? So we'll talk more about this step in step 1 of the process, where we want to make sure we are focusing on a single problem to be solved. Next, hidden barriers are also pitfalls. Sometimes there are gaps in people's capabilities. Either they don't have the skills or they just lack the experience to do what you're asking them. Or maybe they're not organized to work together, or there's a multitude of decision makers, but not one clear owner. All of these things can block everyone from reaching high quality and timely solutions because they simply don't know where to look or begin. And lastly, the bias for action. This one is real. People may have almost always been rewarded to take action quickly. They often jump to action too soon instead of pausing to think. But this forgoes careful consideration and fails to solve the problem. So for these reasons, a strategic problem is difficult to solve, but our process is going to help you work through each of these and overcome these pitfalls. All right, so next slide. So why do we follow a process to solve a problem, right? As I've mentioned, it always feels like having a process and going through these early steps is extra work, but it's important work. So here's why. When people are overwhelmed, they tend to move in an uncoordinated way, which leads to uncontrolled chaos. I'm sure many of you have been in these situations before. What we want to do is use a process that puts actions in order and moves things from left to right. This forces teams to move in straight lines and stay in their right lanes and have everyone move in a smooth way towards solving a problem. But why do we want to do this? Well, first reason to do this is to make sure that the people who are engaged are focused on the things that matter and only the things that matter. Again, MISI. Then we also want people to contribute where they're knowledgeable and really stay in the area where they're knowledgeable. A process also put facts at the center. They allow us to remain objective. It forces analysis and consideration of these objective facts. And lastly, when you have a process, people move in order, right? Together and coordinated. And this in turn improves the quality of the output that you'll get. And that's because I like this saying, it's an old military saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. A process cuts down on time because it's proven, it's repeatable, it's coordinated, and it keeps everyone moving towards an end goal in a coordinated fashion. All right. Okay, so that's a long preamble. Let me introduce you to the process. I simplified it into 4 steps. The first step is to frame the problem. You can't solve a problem if you don't know what you're solving for. The first step is where you get crystal clear and define that problem. You're going to distill it down to a single problem statement and make sure that everyone agrees it's the problem to be solved. After that, your work will be to break that problem down into solvable bits and then organize these issues and investigations into pieces small enough to be analyzed and assessed. The next step is to generate insights and visualize them. So insights are grounded in fact so that they allow you to see the data in an orderly fashion. I also, and this is my personal belief, I truly believe that visualizing insights through pictures can help the stakeholder groups understand the output better than when it's just spoken or written. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think that is absolutely true when it comes to understanding complex topics. Pictures allow you to simplify and focus and see trends. And they are critical for understanding complex situations, right? They help everyone coalesce. Ultimately, what the purpose is they help everyone see the insights and then coalesce around a decision, an action, or the outcome that is trying to be achieved. And this leads us to our third step, the part where the people start to matter. And this is enabling decisions. So the first 2 steps help us come up with options. But this step is about helping the decision makers themselves reach a consensus. So remember, everybody needs to be aligned on the decision. Without this, they will not feel compelled to move to action and the next step. So you need clear decisions and you need clear buy-in for what will happen from key stakeholders to funnel that down to the organization. And without this step happening, the solutions will fall apart. We've all seen this happen, okay? This is an incredibly critical piece of the process. And finally, step 4, this is where you're going to hand off the baton, okay? It's about mobilizing teams to action. This is where you're going to take a solution, push it back to the team, and empower them to implement it, all right? My job is to solve the problem, to figure out the solution, not to implement the action. There are lots of great people that are wonderful at that. And this step is about bringing those people under the tent, showing them the insights and the why behind the solutions and why different pieces mattered, demonstrating executive support, and giving them the right information to implement project management. All right. So now that we know what each step is about, let's just take one more double click on why each one matters, okay? I want to make sure these points are clear. So we can move to the next page, yeah. All right. Step 1, framing the problem. Remember, after gathering the context, this step is about creating the simple problem statement. All right, and that everyone agrees on. And there, you're going to deconstruct it into solvable bits. Okay, so simple problem statement, then broke it down into pieces. I will just say here that this step is often overlooked. But when you overlook this step, the rest of the steps don't matter, okay? Because everyone ends up solving for a different thing. They all start moving in 1,000 different directions and skewed lines. And this is what we want to prevent by getting to that simple problem statement and then defining the solvable bits. Next, visualizing insights. You're going to assess each one of those bits in an objective way. And then from each assessment, you'll develop the insights and share them in easy to understand visuals. And we've got a whole library of these frameworks that you can use on our platform. And then through these visuals, groups will discuss and consider these insights and start to build recommendations. All right. So assessment of the solvable bits, visualize the insights, and then use those insights to help the group have thoughtful conversations that get to recommendations. Next, enabling decisions. Now we're going to take these recommendations and package them and share them with people who make decisions. So my trick here is you want to tell them a story. Okay. This isn't about a readout. This is about telling a story. Structure your findings in a storyline. This allows the decision makers to really understand the context of the situation, why those insights matter, and then move to a recommended solution. And I think there's two pieces that are really important to mention at this stage. In my opinion, they're perhaps the second and third most important components of this problem after defining that problem statement. It is that one or two, or we say two, stakeholders matter, the people matter, all right? The right people have to be engaged across this whole process, but engaging the right people correctly at this stage is critical. And the second is this concept of storytelling. Tell a story to make it easy to understand. You want stakeholders. In a perfect world, stakeholders are hearing the story and you are giving them the words to repeat and justify their decisions and drive buy-in across the broader organization, all right? You are almost giving them the lines in this state, okay? This is a bit of an art, but we've got frameworks you can use to start, all right? Commonly, what you can use is, if you're kind of a beginner in this stage, I'd recommend you use our situation, complication, implication, answer framework. Sounds complex. It's 4 columns, all right? But it's very simple to say, this is the situation. This is the kind of complexities and challenges inherent in that situation. This is the implications that we have to face when solving this problem. And this is what we think the answer is, all right? Very clean story. The other way that's commonly done, especially in a really data-rich environment, is to use what's called the Mento pyramid, which was invented by a McKinsey consultant named Barbara Mento. And it is a clear hierarchy of how you break down conclusions and the data support behind them, visualized in a pyramid. That pyramid is a kind of storytelling framework to help a consultant organize their decks. And there's other ways you can do this. People use a storyboard framework or a hero challenge framework, lots of ways, all right? But the point is, if you are not familiar with creating stories, start with something simple that we've already put together for you. All right, next, mobilizing to action. All right, last step. Going back here to the idea of breaking things apart. You're going to take the solution, break that solution into the bits that can be assigned to people or groups of people or work streams, and then take those bits and work streams and the problems to be solved within them into project management frameworks that have action plans and milestones and clear deliverables and objectives. All right, so that's a lot. And here's where I will pause for contemplation and questions. All right. So if you have a question and you're watching this recording, feel free to reach out directly. But if not, we can move forward to the highlight of our workshop. We're going to go really deep into each one of these steps, starting with step 1, frame the problem. Right? Great. So you'll remember this is the step where we're going to gather context and create the problem statement and deconstruct it into bits. There's 5 things you do here. First is you build a baseline understanding of the problem by gathering all the content that you can. This is where you kind of just swim around in the data, and frankly, it can feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. The way I like to do this is I like to go on a whiteboard and ask the client to talk to me for some period of time, all right? 90 minutes, 2 hours, just talk at me, all right? And through that conversation, I'm asking questions to start sketching the problem and start to get to a simple problem statement. And then to complete my sketch, I'll take that kind of first look at the what we're working with, and I'll take that to other key participants and kind of repeat the process with them, right? So I can start to understand the solution or the problem in context from different angles and understand everybody's perspective, all right? Again, I'm trying to get all the information and swim in it. Now, at this point, I want to get up to speed really fast. So after I've talked to people, I ask for any type of collateral or data or any recommendations, any pre-work that's already been developed or is in the historical context of this problem. I try to get my hands here on as much information as possible. I want hundreds of pages of decks. And then I pull an all-nighter. Okay, I'm kidding. I don't really pull an all-nighter, but like all longtime consultants, I've developed this capability to learn a business and distill a significant amount of information into its critical takeaways in a really short period of time. Again, I go from lots of reams of information to MECE very quickly, but I am looking to get that MECE set of information. So after I feel that I've gathered that data, I exercise the second step. And this is where I use a framework to summarize the challenges, the complications, and the objectives. And I organize all that sets of inputs into this framework, which gives me a really easy way to tell that mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive story of the information that I've seen, and I play that back to the client. All right. And from that, I usually have a kind of a test problem statement that I'm using, but I work that through with the client or group of clients to synthesize to that one single agreed upon problem statement. Then once I have this is where we break it apart into how are we going to solve this, right? There are components of that problem. And based on all of the information that we have, usually those components have kind of started to become clear at this point. And so we're going to get those down into their pillars, if you will, and break them into the smallest bits that we need to break them into to help start to assess them, okay? And these smaller buckets are really helpful to reduce mental overload, both for me and the team, but really for the client team, because we want to help them see objectively, not just within their own perspective, but the information in an objective way. All right, we're going to get them to see those buckets, and that's going to in turn help them start to follow straight and logical lines. So a couple recommendations here. We've got some frameworks in our platform. I mentioned the SCI framework, that situation, complication, implication. That's a great place to start. If you're going to translate that into a story, we just tack on answer in step 3. The other thing that I like to use is something called the decision canvas. And it's not necessarily a me-see framework, but it is a really great framework that is like the who, what, when, where, why, how. And so it gets all that information into a kind of a common group of things that you can start to pull into a more kind of me-see or pillar framework, right? I always start there. And you can access those. They're already in PowerPoint format on the platform. Okay, so once you have these ready, we are ready to move to step 2. Step 2, as an artist, is my favorite. This is where an artist and a scientist, this is where we come up with insights and then we draw pictures of them. All right. So I find it's best to start with hypotheses and to have an assumption about the predicted solution for each of these buckets of problems that you're going to solve before you begin assessment, right? These really, for me, they serve the purpose of being the North Star to help me test logic and guide any kind of analysis construction. So in this stage, this is when we start to gather real data and prep to do this assessment. Now, I'll just mention there's 2 ways you can do this, okay? There's quantitative analysis, which is going to use numbers and produce really fact-based, quantitative, obviously, answers. There's also qualitative reasoning. And qualitative assessments will use research, interviews, and your own intelligence to apply logic and rationalize insights. It is best to use both, right? It's wonderful to have a fact base and then have the color commentary and the important learnings from the people involved in this process to get to the right answer. I often find, though, in some of the work that we do, more related to operating models or organizational work or governance structures, or even some long-term visioning, long-term strategy, there isn't a lot of quantitative analysis that can be done. So we really rely heavily on qualitative reasoning. And again, you trust the people in the process and you gather all the information. I find that most of these answers can be arrived at without quant work. So just a note to those of you who, like me, are not heavy quant people. All right, so I do want to mention here, since I do rely pretty heavily on qualitative reasoning, I've got a process for this, as you might expect. And kind of here's how it works. So when it comes to qualitative reasoning, remember how in step 1, I suggested you ask for all the data that they have. You do that. And some of that data should be internal and some's going to be external, secondary research. Okay, capture that. But primary research here is really going to be your gold mine for insight. And I find this always happens, like the best way to do this is simply through interviews, both internal constituents and, if you can, external constituents. Developing a strong interview guide is your greatest tool to make the most of qualitative reasoning. Okay. The process of developing an interview guide is the important part, because that's where you're thinking through, I had a hypothesis, I want to back into testing if that's correct or incorrect. And therefore, in order to do that, I need to ask these people these questions and get it organized. From there, you'll be able to see, do I have the right questions in place to get all of the information I need to prove or disprove my hypotheses? Okay. Interview guides are quite simple. They're just Word documents of questions. We've got an interview guide and a cheat sheet for creating them on our platform that you can access as well, but it's actually quite simple to do once you've done it once or twice. So after that analysis is done, you're going to analyze your information and start to visualize your findings. So if it's quantitative analyses, obviously there's all sorts of charts and graphs. You can see here we have the trend and comparison graph, and we've got many of these on our platform. We're developing more every month. But for qualitative reasoning, let's just keep it simple, okay? Charts and pillars. Simple, right? Up and down, like that's how you organize it for people. Pulling it into groups of buckets of boxes, that works great too to set it up, right? Don't get fancy here. Just use charts and tables. And you know, your charts and tables often should have arrows with takeaways. Very simple. And your takeaways, after you have your takeaways, you're going to move to your most critical step, which is socializing your findings, right? So this is where you take what you've learned and you're going to say, what do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Kind of what's missing here to your groups of key stakeholders, right? So go talk to them, share visualized insights with them, get their perspective and listen to how they react. Iterate from that feedback on your findings and start to build a story that weaves these insights together and finds recommendations, okay? The people are so critical to helping you find what should be the right answer. Now, I think we're ready to move to step 3. This is that really intensive people part of the process. So all your work so far has helped you reach a conclusion, right? And recommendations. But now your job is to help the decision makers reach their own conclusions and use those to inform their own decisions. So setting up for these decision meetings is worth some very careful preparation, okay? Put the people first. I always ask myself a set of questions as I start to build a story and kind of the pitch back to them. I'm really thinking about this in terms of like facilitating a conversation, right? Not as a readout. But here's how I think about this. So first is, what do I want decision makers to walk out of the room with or knowing? Second, I want to think through, what are the decision makers' individual expectations of this work? What are they coming in with? What perception are they coming in with? And then I put these two things together and I think, all right, what are the stories I need to tell? What are the insights I need to highlight and the solutions I need to recommend to fulfill both my expectations for the meeting and the expectations that they have coming into it? I also want to proactively think through the questions they're going to ask and have answers for those, right? Or know where we don't have answers, but I've done the work of thinking through, well, what are they going to throw at us? And then I want to know a little bit about them, right? I want to know their meeting style and their conversation style. I want to know if they consume high-level slides or if they're deep readers. But that information of kind of how they're going to perceive how the information is shown to them can be the big difference between a meeting that's successful and a meeting that blows up from the very beginning. I could probably teach a whole semester-long class just on this step. All right, I often see, here's the kind of some of the mistakes I've seen. So I think I often see people coming into these meetings to present findings or recommendations, and they are not considering the perspectives and preconceptions that the decision makers are bringing to the table. All right, they've been so focused in how to do the work and what the work told them that they really didn't pull up and think, okay, how do I pivot this so that I can, feed the right information to the right people? But really, this is completely the wrong approach, right? The only perspective that matters is what those people, the steerco or the executive sponsors, the decision makers, what they think. And so you got to start thinking like them, all right? So it is your job as a problem solver to present your recommendations in the context with which they are going to understand them. okay, you need to think of it as telling them, well, I would say you don't need to, but I recommend you think of it as telling them a story, all right? Because you're condensing, in many cases, a lot of information into a very short period of time. You're going to take all those bits that you broke apart and the insights that you reached, and you're going to reconstruct those bits into a framework that communicates the recommendation and the why behind that recommendation and the context of which all of this is occurring very simply. Okay. Again, Misi, what you need and only what you need. That's what goes into the story, not everything you learned, just those critical pieces that help you achieve that goal. So you can build the story, and you should. I will say, when you're in a situation where you are presenting a recommendation to a problem, the psychological trick I almost always use here is to frame the recommendation in terms of 3 options. Okay. Imagine this is 3 columns on a page. You're going to have one option that's a bit too basic. You're going to have one option that's too far in the field and really never going to happen. And in the middle, you're going to have the desired option. Okay. Human nature makes there is a psychological principle behind this where humans can't make decisions in worlds of information overload. So we need to reduce the amount of information. That is that you perceive them. That is what has happened in steps 1 and 2. And then there is another psychological principle that says humans make decisions better when they have options. So you're going to give them those options and make them very simple. Okay. And the reason you're doing this is because you're going to present these and say, well, we, think, logically, the one in the middle is probably the preferred path. What do you think? To facilitate a conversation. Okay. That is the purpose of this meeting. To get to this meeting, let's back up just a little bit. All right. To get to this meeting, there has been a lot of socialization work that you will have completed. Okay. I will say this. Always, I will kind of think about this as a build, right? So start with your client and with small groups at the working level. Have them help you think through that, propose a story and have them react to it. Then you would go to this, kind of go up the chain until you get to the group that's making the decisions. Now, what I will say is better conversations happen when all of the decision makers are in the same room. Okay. So this is why Steerco structures work really well, because they bring the right people to the table at the beginning of the process and then when the decision needs to be made. But in not every case can you build a Steerco. Okay. It just doesn't always work this way. And so my recommendation here is, if you can't get everybody in a room, really be thoughtful about the order in which you approach the either decision makers or executive influencers. Think of the company politics and the structure of the organization. I think you want to go to the friendlies first and the people that kind of matter first, and then the naysayers after that, and then kind of end with the kind of piece of, as many people as you can get in the room. But think about what is the right order of conversation within this particular organization's dynamic. All right. Okay. Now we'll move to step 4. Assuming everybody is on board, decisions have been made, we're all holding hands and ready to move forward. Now we got to go get the people moving. Okay. So as a problem solver, this is usually where, think about it as you're handing off the baton to the group of people that actually get stuff done. So the key role that you as a problem solver play in this process is to transition the vast amount of context and insights and knowledge that you've developed to those people in a way that they can consume. They need to be informed with the right context, the insights, and the knowledge behind the recommendations and why certain pieces of information mattered, why certain pieces of information may not have mattered, and what the insights were to shape the recommendation. Okay. They probably also need to know the context behind the people conversations that happen, so they understand which people are truly on board, which other people might be saying they are, but aren't so keen on what the next steps might be. All right. So they need to all of that context, and your job is to educate. Here too, I think the first step, like tangibly seeking and practically, like what are you going to do? Well, step one, you got to understand who are the right people to take ownership of each piece of this puzzle. Okay. Here we're going to go back to this theme of bits. If you have recommendations, it is now your job to work with those people and break down those solutions into bits that can be implemented, right? Because the operational structure of how something can get built within an organization could be quite different from the structure that you've used to solve the problem. Okay, so you have to reconstruct into that right structure. And then using that structure, form it into work streams, appoint a leader, or sometimes I hear the word DRI with clients, which is a directly responsible individual, and the right kind of working team or V team or core team behind them. All right. So that is kind of the first step. And I always find that that's really the part of you and your client are kind of working through that together. And then you're going to bring those people involved. Right. So once those people are involved, they get engaged to help think through like, how are they going to do it? I do find that if there's a kind of a PMO leader or someone put in place to manage the implementation, they're going to take over from here. But a lot of times there's not, the project's just simply not big enough to justify that. And so this is where the problem solver does play the role of setting up the kind of foundations of a project management framework, such as workstream charters, action plans, deliverable outlines and such. I think it's helpful to use the knowledge that you've amassed in this process to work with those work streams to get those artifacts kind of set up and then consistent across teams. You are doing this to reach a final milestone. And that milestone is the workstream kickoff with the working team members. Okay. Think of this as a kickoff meeting. It's going to show all the information about the problem solving pieces and all the critical information, but give everybody the kind of the high level summary of what you've learned and what you've already shared with them, right? So we're head nodding. Give them the critical information from the decision meeting and the business outcomes that the executives have set forth for them to go and achieve. You might even want to invite a steering committee member or executive sponsor to demonstrate the buy-in and accountability for that team at an executive level to this meeting. But that is the step. And then to make things easier for you, we have a great project kickoff template. I've already done a workshop on this, but it's on our platform. You can use a lot of those slides. These program management or project management slides can be kind of time consuming to create. So we've got a starting point for you. Okay, great. So we're almost done. I just want to conclude with a couple of some of the key tips I think you should keep in mind. You've heard me say it. I'm going to say it again. That problem statement, it's critical. You can't find a solution if you don't know what you're solving for. Okay, so important. 2, the people. Socialization is what ultimately is going to drive the success of your project. It will feel time intensive. Okay, but your project is only going to be successful if you can engage the right people throughout the process. This process works, again, I've described this process in the sense of a kind of 3 to 4 month engagement, right? A really large, complex problem, but really the process itself, you can shrink it down to the smallest strategic problem. The only difference is going to be that it's not going to be as hard to get your head around things. You're not going to have to conduct detailed analyses. You're going to be able to run the logic or run the quantitative, maybe even on a piece of paper pretty quickly. It doesn't require as much heavy socialization, but these core steps are really the same, right? What problem am I solving? What do I need? What's the critical amount of information and insight from it? Who makes the decision and how do I get them to make a decision? And then how do we actually make stuff happen from it? Same process every time. So I'll leave you with some of our proven frameworks. I really advise here, you spend your time with the people. Don't spend your time where you can. I guess you have to spend your time on slides, but cut down where you can. So you can head over to theconsult.co and check out some of our frameworks and visualizations. We are in the process of building these out. I think we've got about 20 available in the platform now. We've got a backlog of about 60. So you can go back and check at any time whenever you're watching this recording, and there's probably more there. And I think we're going to do a little bit of reorganization work to the platform to make those easier to find. But right now you'll find them under strategic frameworks. So there you have it. That's my process. If you're still here with me, I just want to say thank you for participating and for watching this recording. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. It's always helpful for me to know what pieces of this were helpful to you, what pieces of this, kind of what questions you have or could be missed. And I really always want to know what you hated, because then we will stop doing it. So let me know that as well. You can reach out to me directly in the community or Lauren at KeenanReid.com. Whatever is easiest for you would be great. So with that, I will end it here. And thanks again for attending, and we'll see you at our next workshop.